What if the most important moments in history didn't happen in public at all, but behind closed doors, where no cameras, crowds, or textbooks could see them? History is usually presented as a clean, orderly sequence of events. Wars begin with clear causes, treaties are signed with clear intentions, and empires rise and fall as if following a predictable script. This version of the past feels logical and reassuring. It suggests that history moves forward through decisive moments and clear leadership. But this video explores a deeper reality that rarely fits into timelines or classroom summaries. It looks at how real, documented historical events were shaped not just by battles or public speeches, but by private negotiations conducted away from scrutiny. Fear-driven decisions, rushed compromises, and quiet agreements often mattered more than anything said on a battlefield. These hidden moments did not always seem important at the time, yet their long-term impact reshaped nations, societies, and global power in ways no one fully understood when those decisions were made. At the point where this story begins, the world was defined by uncertainty rather than confidence. Nations were exhausted by years of conflict, economies were fragile, and populations were desperate for stability. Leaders faced pressure not only from enemies abroad, but from unrest at home. Survival mattered more than ideals, and control mattered more than consistency. Publicly, governments spoke in the language of peace, order, and progress. Their speeches promised security and a better future, carefully crafted to calm anxious populations. Privately, however, the conversations sounded very different. Behind closed doors, leaders negotiated power, influence, resources, and borders with urgency and suspicion. The contrast between what was said openly and what happened quietly is where history truly changed direction. Most historians agree on the core facts of major historical turning points. We know when wars officially ended, when borders were drawn on maps, and when new political systems replaced old ones. These facts are well documented and rarely disputed, but they only tell half the story. What they often leave out is how rushed, fragile, and uncertain many of these decisions actually were. Newly released archives and historical research up to 2025 reveal that many agreements were made under extreme pressure and limited information. Leaders were guessing, improvising, and hoping problems could be postponed rather than solved. Many outcomes we now describe as inevitable were, at the time, deeply contested, controversial, and far from certain. The common narrative taught in schools suggests that history unfolds logically. Leaders are portrayed as decisive figures, guided by long-term vision and careful planning. This version of history is comforting because it implies control and foresight. It reassures us that the past was shaped by reason rather than chaos. But it is incomplete. Real decision-makers were often overwhelmed, exhausted, and uncertain, operating under constant pressure. They acted with incomplete intelligence, personal bias, and intense fear of losing authority or legitimacy. In many cases, they chose solutions that worked in the short term while quietly pushing consequences into the future. What looked like strategy was often damage control. The future was not designed carefully. It was deferred, postponed, and hoped away. Behind official records and public agreements were private discussions that never made headlines. Declassified documents show leaders bargaining over territory, populations, and influence with surprising bluntness and urgency. These conversations rarely match the idealistic language used in public statements. Long-term stability was frequently sacrificed for immediate political survival. Ending a crisis today mattered more than preventing the next one. These were not secret conspiracies in the dramatic sense seen in movies. They were human negotiations shaped by fatigue, ego, rivalry, and the pressure to appear decisive. The humor, if there is any, lies in how confidently history later portrays these moments. In reality, many decisions were made by people who were unsure, divided, and quietly afraid of getting it wrong. Again and again, historians identify the same turning point across different events and regions. It occurs when leaders prioritize immediate stability over structural fairness. Borders are drawn quickly to end conflict, not to create harmony or long-term cohesion. Promises are deliberately left vague to avoid confrontation or delay hard choices. Difficult questions are postponed for later, with the assumption that future leaders will somehow resolve them. That moment may look small on paper, just a clause, a signature, or a line on a map, but it often sets off consequences that no one fully controls. What is delayed becomes inherited, passed down to generations who never agreed to those compromises. As pressure increased, leaders faced impossible choices: preserve power now and risk instability later, or risk collapse immediately and lose everything. There was rarely a right option, only the least dangerous one in the moment. Publicly, they projected confidence and unity, knowing uncertainty could be fatal to authority. Their speeches suggested clarity and purpose, even when none existed. Privately, however, letters, diaries, and meeting notes tell a very different story. They reveal doubt, disagreement, frustration, and moments of genuine panic. Decisions that shaped millions of lives were sometimes made late at night, under exhaustion, with no clear roadmap forward. These moments expose an uncomfortable truth. History is not shaped by abstract forces alone. It is shaped by human stress, fear, and imperfect judgment under pressure. The outcomes of these decisions reshaped entire nations and societies. Old systems collapsed, not in dramatic explosions, but under the slow weight of unresolved problems. New systems emerged, often fragile, rushed, and contested from the very beginning. Entire regions inherited conflicts rooted in choices made decades earlier by people who never had to live with the consequences. What feels like ancient history today often traces back to one or two quiet meetings where expediency won over foresight. No headlines warned what would follow. The consequences did not appear immediately. They unfolded slowly, generation by generation, until they hardened into permanent features of the world. The deeper meaning of this pattern is uncomfortable but essential. History is not primarily driven by logic, morality, or destiny, no matter how neatly it is presented afterward. It is driven by human emotion, fear of losing power, pride in national identity, exhaustion after conflict, and the desire to maintain control all shape decisions, often more than principles or long-term plans. Leaders did not act as symbols of history. They acted as human beings under strain, reacting to pressure rather than guiding events with certainty. Understanding this does not make the past simpler or easier to accept. It makes it more honest. It forces us to confront how fragile historical outcomes really are. It reminds us that historical outcomes are not inevitable forces of nature. They are the direct result of human behavior under pressure. What makes this story especially relevant is how familiar the pattern remains today. Modern politics still relies on closed-door negotiations and strategic silence. Public narratives are carefully crafted, while the most consequential decisions happen far from public view. Press conferences offer certainty. Private meetings reveal compromise and fear. Technology has changed how information spreads, but human behavior has not fundamentally changed. The same instincts, protect power, delay consequences, control the narrative, remain intact. The mechanisms that shaped the past continue to shape the present. The stage looks different, but the script feels disturbingly familiar. The detail most often mentioned last, or not mentioned at all, is that many of these decisions were never meant to be permanent. They were temporary fixes designed to buy time, calm unrest, or end immediate crises. What was supposed to last months or years ended up defining centuries. Temporary borders hardened into permanent divisions. Provisional agreements became unquestioned realities. Each delay made change more difficult. History did not collapse suddenly or violently. It drifted, quietly locking imperfect decisions into place until reversing them became nearly impossible. When the full truth is understood, these events no longer look like accidents or historical mysteries. They look like predictable outcomes of human systems pushed beyond their limits. Pressure narrowed choices. Fear shortened timelines. Compromise replaced vision. This is not the story of evil masterminds or flawless heroes shaping destiny. It is the story of ordinary people in extraordinary positions, making decisions they believed they had to make, without fully understanding the cost that future generations would pay. History matters not because it's finished, but because its patterns are still alive. If you want to understand how the world really works and why the same mistakes keep repeating, keep questioning the story you're told. If this changed how you see history, like the video, subscribe, and stay curious.